And I'm not on the screen. I want to welcome everybody. Give me 1 second. I'll get me back on. And here I am, Bartosz. I want to welcome everybody to Dead Talk Live. Today we are joined by a very special guest, writer-director Bartosz M. Kowalski. Bartosz has written and directed Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight, Part 1 and 2, currently available on Netflix. So, Bartosz, thank you so much for being our guest today. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. Welcome, everybody.
And just to note, Bartosz is joining us all the way from Poland, so we want to thank him. It's like currently 9 o'clock over there. So let's get right to it, Bartosz. Now, like I said, you wrote, directed Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight, parts 1 and 2. Let's start with the first one. The first one uses the backdrop of a camp for teenagers that are addicted to technology. What made you choose that theme that is very relevant today as opposed to the traditional camp counselor slasher flicks that we have seen in the past?
Well, there's it is it is relevant, but there was never like this big master plan of like a social commentary behind it. Basically, to be 100% honest with you, I mean, I really wanted to find like a simple but an original way to get rid of the technology, the cell phones, because I mean, obviously, it's so anticlimactic nowadays when you get a group of people that are supposed to be in danger out in the middle of nowhere, and basically we live in the world where you have reception everywhere and
Yeah.
it just takes 5 clicks to get some help. So so basically, yeah, like I said, there was never supposed to be this major social commentary behind it. It was more of a starting point of how to get rid of the technology in a inventive way, as opposed to having the kids having no signal in the middle of a forest.
Makes perfect sense. Now, there are two killers in both movies. Again, going back to the first one, tell us how you came up with the story of the brothers, the meteor, their transformation. It was very creative. What was your inspiration behind that?
Well, the very original inspiration came from the Polish politics, which, yeah, this is something that only Polish people could actually figure out, because a couple of years ago, well, more like 10, 15 years ago, the Polish prime minister and the president of Poland were twins, and they were like far right twins. And back in the days, like 35 or 40 years ago, they actually acted in a movie together, and that's where it actually originated from.
Wow.
The two killers, they're twins, and basically it's like this tiny little political commentary in there. It's kind of subtle, but as I said in the beginning, it's a detail that only Polish people could actually catch. So that was the original inspiration, and then as we went along with the screenplay, it actually started working that maybe it's just a little cooler, and it's going to be more fun to actually have one guy, actually to have two guys as opposed to one, and also to kind of play around with like this omnipresent thing that wherever the kids would go, the killer would magically show up
Hmm.
everywhere. And then if it turns out that there's actually two of them, and maybe it would also help a little bit with the overall structure of the actual plot.
Now, in the film, you explain the transformation of the two killers. They're very deformed, and as the audience, as we're watching this, we're like, "Oh my God, what happened to what we think is one killer to make him so deformed? So like, it looks like this guy went through the most radiation infected place on the world, spent a week holiday there, and came back." Uh, so that brings in the story of the meteor. Now, the way you explain it is the meteor doesn't just infect human beings, it actually transforms them into an alien species. At least that's the interpretation that I got from it. They're not human beings anymore. They're like an alien race. Uh, do you agree with that, or do you have your own interpretation?
In Yeah, in a way, I agree. I mean, I thought it would be cool to have like this little sci-fi element in it, but that's also something that relates a little bit to the political context in Poland, because the film that the two Polish political twins acted in 40 years ago, or maybe it was like 50 years ago, can't even remember. It was actually about the two little kids who stole a piece of the moon, which was actually like a tiny little meteor.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also relating this very specific moment to this very old Polish flick with these two evil guys. But then another element, as I said, was I also thought that it would be cool to have like this tiny little science fiction twist.
Mm-hmm.
But did it actually transform the two guys into an alien species? I don't know if that's maybe that's a little too far, because I mean at the end of the day that's pretty much all we could like come up with. That's all we could afford would be we actually casted this actor, this huge guy who actually, like, without all the prosthetics and everything, he also looked kind of monsterish. But then with all the prosthetics that we put on him, that's pretty much yeah, like the concept art was kind of different in the beginning. It was supposed to be like pieces of meteorite coming
Mm-hmm.
out of their heads and stuff, but we couldn't afford it, so that's basically everything that we could physically make in terms of special makeup
It
effects at
looks
that time.
great. It actually looks really, really good. And I'm going to get back to the point as to why I thought there were different species in a second. But I want to ask you a question in between. You brought the brothers back in the second movie. You didn't have to do that because they're not the central antagonist, the killers in the second movie. So why did you bring the two brothers? Why did you keep them alive to where we thought they were dead in the first one, and why did you bring them back for the second one?
Yeah, with the second film, of course, we're facing this big question: like, should we do the same thing all over again with the big fat guys just killing a different group of teenagers in a different place and just make it bigger, faster, and more bloody?
Mm-hmm.
Um, or just give it a shot and just turn it upside down and just do something completely different? And at the end of the day, we chose to do the second, more risky version. But then when we decided to turn our final girl into the main villain,
Mm-hmm.
along with the young police officer, then it just kind of felt like if we just totally like forget the villains from part one, it would just feel kind of weird. And I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to put them in a prison cell. And then at the same time, I thought it could be actually pretty funny that in the first part they were like so huge and invincible, and then in the second part they're just stuck in a prison cell, and
Yeah.
they're just right there sitting, and they're just stupid.
I'll tell you exactly why. For me, I thought it might be a different species. I didn't feel that way after watching part one, but after part two, a lot of the script and attention is paid to the relationship to the final girl who's turned into a killer and the cop who's also turned into a monster. There's a lot of dialogue in her explaining their ways, and he's questioning her, and there's a very intimate moment shared between the two of them. So I'm like, just like any other species, they want to reproduce. So for me, that's what's like, okay, maybe they're not just infected humans with like this outer space alien micro whatever, but it's transforming them into a different species. Did that at all cross your mind when, especially with the intimate moment between the two of them? You know, tell us
Yeah,
about that.
no, yeah. Not really. I mean, they also speak an alien language that
Yeah.
we a mutant language that we invented, which I imagine for some people it might sound similar to Polish because it's like two different alien languages, but it's something very different. And we had this very talented language expert that just came up with the whole language from the very beginning. But yeah, the reproduction stuff. I thought that their sex scene would just be kind of gross and fun at the same time, and that's something that I
It was shocking. It was shocking.
was it really?
It was shocking in a good way. It was like, whoa! I was not expecting to see alien sex.
Yeah, I thought it would be actually pretty fun. And it's like before I actually started typing down the script, just when we came up with the concept for the whole sequel, I was like, yeah, we just really need to have this the mutant sex scene in there, and it just has to be like really gross, but at the same time we really wanted to make it elegant at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, so that it's not just like some monstrous humping, like
Mm-hmm.
something really disgusting, but they're actually really in love. And it's as much as their bodies are gross and yeah, and super disgusting, but they're in love, and it's supposed to be like really erotic and very elegant at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, reactions were super mixed as to the entire film. So yeah.
Now, like I mentioned, both films are on Netflix. When and how did Netflix get involved with your project?
Yeah, so with part two was a super simple story, but with part one was a bit more complicated because I mean, ever since I finished film school, I started to get a feature horror project off the ground in Poland because like this genre had never existed in this country,
Mm-hmm.
and I just kept failing and failing, and I started doing documentaries for HBO. Then I did a feature film that is like a super social drama genre style. It's called Playground.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then finally, we found an investor, and we just started doing Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Part 1 as like this super low budget film that was meant to be released in Polish cinemas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much it. But then the pandemics hit, and like 1 week before our premiere, all the cinemas were closed,
Mm-hmm.
and like the investors and everybody, we were just super petrified because all of a sudden it turned out that it's just going to be a disaster after so many years of trying to get any horror film off the ground. And then Netflix showed up, and they got the film, and it turned out to be a Netflix original, and it premiered all over the world.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so it was like this huge coincidence that actually turned out to be it turned out to have a happy ending for us because the viewership was very good around the world. And then straight after we started working on part two.
I'm sure Netflix, because of the popularity of part one, there was a no brainer for them. They're like, let's do part two, and they were the investors and all that, right?
Yes,
Uh,
and with part two, it was straight up Netflix original, commissioned by Netflix. And first we'd write a treatment, they would check the treatment, then the screenplay, and it was all done under like
yeah.
Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah, because at that point, I mean, you're bringing in a major studio, and God knows the committees that has to go through. Let's talk a little bit about Poland, okay? You mentioned that Poland did not really have movies in the horror genre, but Poland in general, me being in the entertainment industry as you are, they are really trying to attract filmmakers from around the world. They offer great incentives, money for Americans, people all over the world to come to Poland to shoot their films. You being Polish, living there, how would you describe the film industry in Poland?
How would I describe it? I mean, I think Polish cinema is pretty strong and has been pretty strong for decades, but it's very strong in like festival, artistic, difficult movies. And there's tons of examples of movies being made, like from Kieślowski to like Paweł Pawlikowski, Ida and Cold War and so on and so on. And then these are brilliant films that travel around festivals around the world. But this is like something completely different to where my heart personally is. And in terms of horror genre itself, like for the past 50, 60 years, you had just like a couple of horror films and most of them failed. And I'm not even mentioning like Andrzej Żuławski, that made some international success, but that's also like difficult festival movies. I'm not even mentioning like Roman Polanski with like Fearless Vampire Killers, because that's not even a Polish film. And that's also something that, you know, came out like 50, 60 years ago. But speaking about like slasher movies and commercial horror cinema, like that has never existed in this country. And it's just changed just like 3-4 years ago when Netflix came in, and some new doors started opening, and all of a sudden a Polish film made in Poland gets a big viewership around the world, and it gets released in like 195 countries around the world. It's pretty mind-blowing. But
it is, and Netflix seems to be leading the charge in Poland. Just this past year, I saw a series called The Krakow Monster that was also filmed in Poland. In fact, you had one of the actors in Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight in part one. You had one of the actors. Yeah.
I did. I don't know. I haven't
seen
you
did.
The Krakow Monsters, to be honest.
I don't remember his name, but that's another. This was not a movie. It was a multi-episode series. I don't know if there's
I know.
And Polish, shot in Poland, all Polish, and again, it's on Netflix. So it seems like Netflix is really leading the charge in coming into Poland and really propping up the film industry and television industry over there.
I hope so. I mean, I'm just finishing up another film for Netflix. It's going to premiere on Halloween.
Nice.
So yeah, we're working, and then we're doing you know, the kind of films that I would never be able to do in this country if it wasn't for Netflix. Because I mean, Polish Film Institute, you know, you can get a grant for a movie, but it's a very specific type of cinema, artistic festival movies. And of course we have TV stations, and we do have commercial cinema that pretty much comes down to romantic comedies or like crime thrillers. And that's pretty much it. Like science fiction movies, horror movies, doesn't matter what subgenre we're talking, like that has never existed here. And yeah, things are changing with Netflix, and I couldn't be more happy.
Let's go back to the movies again for a little bit. In part one especially, you paid what I thought was tribute to some classic horror movies, like the kill with the sleeping bag. That was something out of Friday the 13th. Was that your inspiration for that particular kill scene?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like one of my favorite kill scenes in all the slasher films. Yeah, and it's definitely an inspiration from that specific movie. Plus, it's really cheap to do.
Yes. You just stuff a sleeping bag with a sack of potatoes or whatever, and just bash it up against a tree.
Exactly, and it's so effective. It's so brilliant, and it's. I mean, the entire Halloween franchise is.
And then again, the references to Sarah Connor, the Terminator. It seemed like you really wanted to pay tribute to a lot of your favorite classic films. Would you say that's accurate as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Friday the 13th with the sleeping bag. Overall, pretty much like any reference that we could throw in would be like ticking off the list of my very favorite films. Yeah, Terminator, of course, it's
It's a
one of them.
classic. It's a
Absolutely, yeah,
classic.
of course.
If you had to pick between in either in parts one or two, what would you say was the most complicated kill that you had to shoot out of both movies? The one that presented you with the biggest challenge?
Hmm. I don't know if I'm able to choose one. It's like
Because that's pretty bloody. I mean, these movies, for our audience who hasn't watched them yet, these movies do not spare on the blood and guts. It's gory, and you did not hold back anything. So they all hold a special place for you. There's not one that
yeah,
stands out.
yeah, pretty much like every single one of them was pretty tough. Like I have a comparison because first film I did was like I mentioned a social drama. In between Nobody Sleeps 2 and the film I'm finishing right now, I did another social drama, and it's just like from my experience, it's just so much easier to do a film that doesn't have practical effects in it. Like
Yeah.
as long as there is some sort of a special makeup effect, some blood, any kind of practical effects on set, it just takes loads of time, and it's just tough. And it doesn't matter if you're splitting the guy in half or you're just ripping the chick's face off, which is probably like my favorite kill.
That
But there,
was
but
that was pretty unique. That was pretty kick ass. Yeah.
yeah, and you just kind of like plan around it, like you need this moment from this angle and this moment from that angle, and when you plan it carefully, you just it's you can still execute it in a pretty low budget way, but it's time consuming, and it's pretty tough, especially that if you like rip the face off too quickly and it just breaks in half, like you cannot do a second shot because we only had one face, of
Yeah.
course. And then I mean, fortunately it worked out, and then you just clean up the edges and CGI. So it's pretty much every single kill is sort of a mix between, well, it leans more towards practical effects, but there's always a little cleanup in CGI.
Now, I'm going to point out one kill scene which seems like it was done mainly through practical effects. At the end of part one, when the police officer is split in half with the axe.
Yeah.
Okay, clean cut. All we see are from the back of his knees down to his feet. The killer, takes a whack, and then the blood and guts fall down, and the legs fall in opposite directions. That seems like it was done all in practical effects. Was there CGI involved in that?
There was all the way practical effects, but I think as far as I remember, we had like part of a plastic tube that came out with the guts that we had to clean up. But that's, yeah, it was just like a simple rubbering, yeah, simple CGI cleanup. But that's like, yeah, 99% practical, yeah.
Okay, we're out of time, but I got to ask you before we go: are there any talks, plans of a part three, or no?
Not
Or
at the
you're not
moment.
allowed to say? You that
Uh,
that's
I think I'm allowed because I mean there is no talk. I
okay.
mean I do have a concept for part three, which I think it's pretty cool, and it shifts the genre again, and it throws everything upside down again. But it's maybe in the future. I mean, right now
Maybe.
we're doing something else for Halloween, and then we'll see in the future.
I think that's great that you partnered up with Netflix and your movies are not limited to just Poland. They're for everybody in the world. I think that's a little bit of luck, great directing, great writing, and I think it's great. Congratulations to
Thank
getting
you
hooked
so
up with
much.
Netflix. Congratulations on Nobody Sleeps in the Woods tonight, part one and two. I encourage our audience. It's available on Netflix. I know mostly everybody has Netflix. Check it out if you're looking for a fun, entertaining horror movie. Bartosz wrote and directed both films. Bartosz, I want to thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your thoughts and experiences in making these movies. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we go?
No, just thank you so much for inviting me over. I really appreciate it.
I
And
appreciate
yeah,
you coming on. It was a fascinating conversation. I want to thank our audience who's tuned in, both live and those who will be watching this later on. On behalf of Bartosz and myself, stay safe, stay walking, guys. Till next time.
Thanks so much.